I've been dead for 7 years, 3 months, and 16 days. At least that's what I tell myself now. The prison system never got the memo. When the heavy steel door slammed shut behind me with a sound like a dozen ribs snapping at once, I knew the pale light of Sheffield, the city I called home, would be the last sight I'd ever see. Not the city itself, but the memory of it, fading like an old photograph. The guards didn't bother to list my crimes aloud. They didn't have to. What did it matter anymore? Treason? Sedition? Failure to pay council taxes? Mouthing off against the mayor's nephew who strutted around like he owned the place in his uniform. More costume than authority. Charges blurred together down here, where right and wrong were just myths spun by those still clinging to justice and hope above ground. Down here, in the bowels of Ravenhall Penitentiary, only endurance remained. The intake chamber smelled of bleach and fierce sweat, a mix that burned my nostrils and stuck to my throat like the promise of sickness. Hundreds of us lined up, shackles clinking like broken rosary beads in trembling hands. The man next to me was a thin bloke named Arthur, caught flogging fake holy candles to desperate churchgoers. He wept quietly, tears falling onto stained concrete that had soaked up the misery of thousands before. They disappeared instantly, swallowed by stone thirsty for sorrow. The officer who processed me was half machine now, a patchwork of flesh and metal. One eye was a spinning optical scanner, clicking and whirring as it scanned my face. The other eye, still human, held a flicker of something. Pity, maybe, but if feelings survived here, they were ghosts. Cold metal fingers pressed against my throat, measuring pulse, temperature, chemical signatures that would identify me once my body gave up. Inmate 547832. It growled in a voice like rusted gears. Classification. Political. Subclass. Minor sedition. Life expectancy. 8 to 12 months standard. 8 to 12 months. They'd calculated my death before I'd even seen my cell. The uniform they handed me was a grim shade of brown, like dried blood or rusted iron. It hung loosely, designed to mark me clearly should I try to run. The fabric was rough, woven from recycled threads still smelling faintly of whoever had worn it before. Probably someone who died in it, or maybe just given up needing clothes altogether. My cell was a tiny box of reinforced concrete, 3 meters wide, 2 deep, just tall enough to stand without smashing my head if I kept my shoulders slouched. The walls wept with condensation, dark stains forming ugly maps of worlds I'd never see again. A narrow slot near the floor allowed guards to slide in my daily ration of gray paste, and another slot at eye level let them stare at me whenever they fancied. No windows, no sunlight, only the harsh glare of a single fluorescent strip that never dimmed. The sleeping platform was a bare metal shelf welded to the wall. No mattress, no pillow, no blanket, just the uniform on my back. Cold seeped through the fabric in minutes, settling into my bones like a parasite feeding on warmth and hope. Sleep wasn't rest here. It was just another survival trick, a temporary escape from consciousness that left me more drained than awake. That first night, I learned to listen to Penitentiary Ravenhall's symphony. Distant voices drifting through vents, fragments of prayer, curses, mad laughter echoing like ghosts in the concrete. Someone screamed 3 floors down, a raw, endless howl that became just part of the background noise, like the hum of generators or rats scuttling in the walls. I counted the seconds between guard patrols, memorizing their rhythm like a prayer. Every 8 minutes and 43 seconds, heavy boots would march past, pause for exactly 7 seconds to peer through the slot, then trudge on. These guards were barely human. Bionic enhancements kept them working longer, their eyes replaced with night vision sensors, their voices mechanical through vox implants. They took cold pleasure in our misery, not hatred, because to hate would mean seeing us as people, not inventory. And we were inventory, broken goods with limited shelf life. Morning brought the first meal or what passed for one. The gray paste slid through the slot, tasteless and thick, a cocktail of recycled protein and synthetic vitamins engineered to keep bodies alive but barely functioning. No utensils, just my fingers. I licked the tray clean, uncertain when the next meal would come, or if it would come at all. Later, I learned that paste contained more than nutrients. Mild sedatives to dull aggression, mood stabilizers to stave off suicide, and psychoactive traces to soften minds for conditioning. Those first weeks, I felt like I was watching my life through a foggy window, detached and unreal. The other inmates were shadows at first, snatches of voices, glimpses through cell cracks. The bloke to my left, Marcus, had been there 6 years. Once a clerk for the local council, convicted for falsifying reports to feed his family during the Great Famine. He talked non-stop to keep his mind from snapping, telling me about his wife and kids, who probably forgot his face by now. "Remember who you were," he whispered through the wall. "Hold on to something. A smell, a song, the sunlight through your window. Let go of that, and you become what they want." Across the corridor, a woman screamed in her sleep every night for a month. Dreams full of fire and falling children. Visions of a town burnt to ash while she watched from a hospital rooftop. She'd been a social worker, convicted for diverting supplies to save more lives than the law allowed. Her crime was compassion. Her punishment, eternal torment. On my 5th day, labor began. They woke us before dawn, a meaningless word down here, and marched us through endless corridors. Ravenhall wasn't just a prison. It was a factory for breaking bodies and spirits. I was assigned to the forge, a furnace of heat and smoke where we assembled parts for weapons destined to conquer lands we'd never see. The temperature hovered just below what flesh could endure, hot enough to weaken, not to kill quickly. The air was thick with metal dust and chemical fumes, burning lungs and leaving a coppery taste in my mouth. We worked in teams of 12, our movements choreographed by the relentless rhythm of the production line and the threat of shock prods wielded by supervisors. The parts were simple: triggers for rifles, power couplings for engines, guidance chips for shells. Precision was everything. Fail and punishments followed, creative, cruel. Shaky hands shackled into painful braces. Lagging workers injected with stimulants to keep them functional as their bodies shut down. The supervisors logged which punishments boosted productivity best, treating us like lab rats in a grand experiment. I learned to dissociate, letting my mind drift while my hands worked mechanically. Survival at a cost. Days blurred into an endless present. Grass, rain, wind, forgotten sensations. The prison's social web was vicious. Gangs led by ex-military men or hardened criminals controlled contraband and cell assignments, demanding food, protection, or favors, enforcing rules with brutal efficiency. I fell under the wing of Kane, a scarred former sergeant convicted of desertion during a cult uprising. He claimed he'd been saving civilians, but the officers called him a coward. Kane was discipline incarnate. Under his protection, I learned the rules. Never show weakness, predators smell it. Never volunteer, volunteers are first to die. Never trust completely, betrayal is currency. Never give up hope, even if that hope is just dying quickly instead of slowly. The guards loved conflict. Fighting prisoners were easier to control. They engineered rivalries over scraps and privileges, then watched us tear each other apart like science experiments. I killed my first man on a Tuesday, or what I called Tuesday since time lost meaning years ago. Singh was a tax collector, small and slippery, caught stealing from my food ration bit by bit. When I caught him, he laughed, said I was too weak to stop him. I wasn't. The beating was clinical, precise, joints, soft spots, no visible marks to alert the guards. When he stopped moving, I felt nothing but mild satisfaction. Guards found the body during the next inspection and chalked it up to heart failure from stress and malnutrition. No questions asked. Singh vanished from the records, replaced within hours. Kane nodded at me that night, approval or something like it. First kill's always hardest. After that, it's just another skill, like welding or reading. He was right. The second and third kills came easier. Violence became routine, as ordinary as breathing. Horror's limits expanded to new, unimaginable depths. The physical violence was only the surface. The real destruction was slow, invisible, the erosion of everything human. We were fed just enough to survive, never to thrive. Sleep was rationed. Medical care was minimal. Psychological warfare was subtle but savage. They dangled false hope, early release programs, competitions to prove rehabilitation. All lies. No one left Ravenhall alive except in body bags or as part of the servitor conversion program. Servitors, once prisoners like us, had their humanity surgically stripped, replaced by cold obedience. I watched friends volunteer, convinced they were choosing survival over death. Marcus was one. When his family died in a mining accident, he gave up. The last time I saw him, he swept the corridor outside my cell, movements robotic, eyes replaced with sensors. I called his name. No response. Marcus was gone. Seasons changed above ground. Summer's stifling heat made the forge nearly lethal. Winter's chill seeped into bones, each breath visible in the freezing air. Years, or what felt like years, passed. Hair grayed, then whitened, falling in clumps. Teeth loosened and fell. The woman who screamed died in my third winter. Her final breath rattled through the wall for days before her body was dragged away like wet cloth. New prisoners arrived, wide-eyed and terrified, asking about justice, appeals, contact with the outside world. Old-timers looked on with distant pity. I tried to help some, sharing survival rules, but most ignored me, clinging to illusions of innocence and escape. Gladiatorial combat began in my fourth year. Disciplinary exhibitions. The guards called them. Prisoners fought in makeshift arenas for the amusement of staff, betting on outcomes like livestock auctions. I was drafted after hitting a guard who taunted a dying man next to my cell. The guard mocked the man's family, traded cruel jabs about what services my body might provide once I was too weak to work. Rage, long bottled, exploded. My fist crushed his larynx. He gasped silently, never to speak normally again. My opponent was Voss, a former pit fighter convicted of killing a mayor's son during an unsanctioned bout. Young, strong, fearless. The crowd roared as he entered the arena. Weapons were crude. Rebar, chains, broken bottles wrapped in cloth. I chose a pipe, heavy enough to crush bone, light enough to move fast. Voss picked a chain, testing its weight like a pro. 17 minutes of hell. Voss was faster, stronger, but desperation and cunning were my allies. I dodged, waited, then struck when he overreached, smashing the pipe into his solar plexus. Blood sprayed. A second blow to the base of his skull ended it. The crowd cheered, but their praise felt like condemnation. I'd become exactly what they wanted, a killer for entertainment, a broken man forgetting survival from surrender. Returned to my cell, they promised rewards I knew were lies. The victories became easier technically, harder emotionally. Each opponent was a mirror, another broken soul shaped by the same cruelty. Memories of who I'd been fated: teacher, gardener, man with a life beyond these walls. The lines blurred. Maybe I'd never been anything else but a prisoner, a killer, a ghost dragged through endless darkness. Kane died in my fifth year, not by violence but cancer, poisoned lungs from toxic air. His last words warned me, "Don't let them make you something you can't live with. Good men become monsters here. Monsters find ways to stay human. The choice is yours." His death left a power vacuum filled quickly by violence. I stayed clear, learning that being visible was dangerous. Better to be middling, valuable enough to protect, unthreatening enough to survive. The new leader was Catherine, a former naval officer convicted of mutiny for refusing orders to shell civilians. Ruthless, intelligent, survival above all else. She approached me after an arena win. "You fight well," she said, eyes cold as winter. "But like you still think you'll leave. That'll get you killed." She was right. Somewhere I still clung to hope, a dangerous weakness. Then came the escape attempt in my sixth year. A group of political prisoners bribed guards, mapped tunnels, and invited me for my skills. The plan: distract during shift change, overpower at a checkpoint, crawl through maintenance tunnels to the surface. I agreed, knowing it was doomed, not because of the plan, but because the real prison was what we'd become. Our cells were inside us, no matter where we fled. The guards knew from the start. One conspirator sold us out. The alarms sounded, tunnels sealed. The hunt was clinical. Gas, shock prods, casual brutality. 12 tried. 4 died immediately, 3 converted, 5 returned with harsher restrictions. I survived, but at a cost: solitary confinement. Smaller than before, barely room to lie down. No light but a crack beneath the door. No company but my own voice and the creeping madness. I talked to ghosts. Memories, poetry, songs fading into silence. Hallucinations came. Faces at the edge of vision. Shadows with depth. Voices that weren't there. When returned to general population, Ravenhall had changed: worse food, harsher work, expanded gladiatorial tournaments with betting pools involving staff from across the system. I was a featured fighter now. Reputation preceded me. Fear, respect, envy, pity in their eyes. They knew being good at violence was a curse. The tournament was elimination style, prizes meaningless. Extra food, better cells, empty promises. My first opponent was David, barely 20, caught dodging conscription. He fought with desperation, no skill. I killed him quickly, efficiently, without feeling. Each fight blurred into the next. My movements sharpened. My heart hardened. The crowd swelled, drinking in blood and misery. The final match was Catherine. "One of us walks away," she said before the fight. "The other becomes fertilizer for the weeds in the graveyard. But we both died the day we arrived." She was right. That knowledge freed me from the last chains of conscience. We fought like ghosts, each skilled, each broken. I won through treachery, feigning injury, striking when her guard dropped. She fell silently, eyes empty as a grave. The crowd erupted, but their cheers sounded like the screams of the dead. I stood over her bloodied body, feeling nothing. The championship was mine, and none of it mattered. That night, promises came. Better food, better cells, all lies. The tournament was a show, proof of what happens to those who survive too well. Years blurred, violence and despair grinding everything down. The others avoided me now. I was something else, something dangerous and broken. New prisoners cycled through, lost and terrified. I was a ghost among the living dead. Dreams came rarely, of sunlight through windows, children laughing, food made with care. Ghosts from a life I barely remembered. But the dreams faded. The man I'd been was gone. The system had won. Yet, in the darkest corner of my mind, a flicker stirred. Something that might be called hope. But that's a story for another time. Years in Ravenhall had stripped me down to the barest bones of survival. But nothing prepared me for the cold truth that struck on the morning of my 6th year. The alarm had rung out shrilly, slicing through the clatter of the forge and the drone of machinery like a butcher's cleaver through stale bread. It was time for the exhibition, the gladiatorial combat. Only this time, it was a tournament. Bigger stakes, louder crowd, and the kind of brutality that made even the guards lean in for a better look. I remember the chill before dawn, the steel cold of the arena floor beneath my worn boots. My opponent was a young lad named David, barely out of school, or so it seemed. His clothes hung loose on his thin frame, and his eyes darted around like a frightened rabbit in a snare. I could almost smell the fear rolling off him in waves. David's uniform was a faded blue jumpsuit, patched and frayed at the edges. The kind of gear scrimped on by someone who'd never expected to be in a fight for his life. His trainers were scuffed, the laces barely tied. He looked like he'd been thrown into this nightmare by accident. No accessories, just a dull silver chain he fiddled with nervously. A talisman, perhaps, or a last remnant of a life before the pit. The crowd, a mix of guards and prisoners hungry for blood, howled as the bell rang. David lunged forward with all the desperation of a man fighting shadows. His punches were wild, untrained, lashing out like a cornered animal. I danced around, moving with the cold precision years of survival had carved into me. I wasn't fast, but I was patient. I let him tire himself out, watching for a mistake. When it came, I didn't hesitate. A solid jab to his ribs, a quick hook to the jaw, and then the finishing blow. A sharp strike to the temple that sent him crumpling to the floor. The crowd erupted, but their cheers felt distant, like echoes from a hollow chamber. I stood over David's broken form, breathing steady, feeling nothing but the dull satisfaction of a problem solved. The boy's eyes fluttered shut, and I wondered if he remembered his mother's face, or the last meal he'd had outside this hellhole. After the fight, Catherine approached me in the dim corridor behind the arena. She was tall, lean, dressed in a crisp black uniform that hugged her form like armor. Her blonde hair was pulled back tight, strands escaping to frame a face that was both beautiful and terrifying. She wore heavy boots that clicked sharply on the concrete, and a silver pendant glinted at her throat. A serpent coiled around a dagger. I imagined it was a symbol of her ruthlessness. "You fight like someone still dreaming of freedom," she said, her voice low and dangerous, like the hiss of a snake. "That's a luxury you can't afford here." I wanted to argue, to tell her that without hope we were nothing. But the words stuck in my throat. She was right. The last trace of softness in me was slipping away. Days later, the tournament continued. Opponent after opponent fell to my steady hands. Each fight blurred into the next, the faces melting into a sea of fear and despair. I stopped seeing them as people, just obstacles to be removed. The crowd's cheers grew louder with every victory, but the weight in my chest only grew heavier. One night, after a particularly brutal match, I found myself alone in the dim light of my cell. The metal shelf beneath me was cold enough to freeze the blood in my veins, but I welcomed the numbness. I traced the scratches on the wall, the haphazard tally marks of years spent counting days, or maybe deaths. Couldn't remember which. That's when the memory hit me, sharp and sudden. A flash of sunlight through a window, the scent of freshly cut grass, the sound of children laughing in a garden. For a moment, I was that man again. A teacher in a small town near Nottingham, with a garden full of flowers I'd grown just because they were beautiful. But the memory faded, dissolving into the shadows of the cell. I was no longer that man. I was something else entirely. The next morning, Kane's cell lay empty. The old sergeant had finally succumbed to the poison in the air, the slow, invisible killer that ate away at lungs and hope alike. I stood outside his door, the scent of decay still faint, and remembered his last words. "Don't let them turn you into something you can't live with." I wasn't sure if I was already there. The prison shifted around me like a living thing. New rules, new punishments, new faces. The guards' smiles were thinner, their cruelty sharper. The tournaments expanded, drawing bigger crowds and raising the stakes. The food worsened, the work grew more brutal, and the very air seemed heavier with despair. Then came the escape plan. A group of political prisoners had bribed guards, mapped out tunnels, and invited me to join them. They saw my skills and endurance as assets, tools to be wielded in their desperate bid for freedom. The plan was elegant. Create a distraction during the shift change, overpower guards at a secondary checkpoint, and slip through maintenance tunnels to the surface before alarms could sound. I agreed, though deep down, I knew it was a fool's errand. Escape wasn't just about leaving the prison, it was about leaving ourselves behind. But we carried ourselves within no matter where we fled. The night of the attempt was a symphony of tension. Heartbeats drummed loud in my ears as we moved through shadowed corridors, whispers punctuated by the soft clink of shackles. We were ghosts, slipping through the bowels of Ravenhall, each step a gamble. But the guards had known all along. One of our own had betrayed us. Peter, a gaunt man with haunted eyes, slowly wasting away from malnutrition, desperate enough to sell us out. When the alarms blared, sealing the tunnels, hope shattered like glass. The hunt that followed was merciless. Gas forced us into the open, shock prods silenced resistance, and casual violence reminded us why no one ever escaped Ravenhall alive. Of the 12 who tried, 4 died immediately, 3 were dragged off for servitor conversion, and 5, including me, were returned to the general population under harsher conditions. Solitary confinement was my sentence. The cell was smaller, darker, a coffin without a lid. Barely room to lie down. No light but a faint glow seeping from beneath the door. No company but the echo of my own breath and the creeping madness. I talked to ghosts, memories, fragments of poetry, songs from a past life. The boundary between thought and speech blurred until I was responding to voices that existed only in my mind. Hallucinations followed. Faces flickering at the edge of vision. Shadows with substance in the blackness. And yet, The knowledge that none of it was real did little to comfort me. When I was finally returned to general population, Ravenhall had changed again. The brief period of reform under a new administrator was gone, replaced by harsher rules, more frequent fights, and a prison that seemed hellbent on grinding us into dust faster than ever. The gladiatorial fights had evolved into a full tournament system, with betting pools and championships that drew staff from across the prison network. I was a featured competitor now, my reputation growing with every brutal victory. But as I looked around the crowded arena, faces twisted with fear, respect, envy, and something like pity, I realized the truth. Being good at violence here wasn't an advantage, it was a curse, and the final match loomed ahead. But that's a story for another day. The arena was packed to bursting. Guards on their raised platforms, prisoners squeezed into every corner, their faces a mixture of anticipation, fear, and something darker, like a shared understanding that this wasn't entertainment. It was survival writ large. I stood in the center, the cold concrete floor biting through the thin soles of my boots. The overhead lights buzzed, casting harsh shadows that danced like ghosts around the perimeter. My opponent was Catherine. She stepped into the ring with the quiet confidence of a predator. Her black uniform was spotless, the fabric hugging every curve of her lean, powerful frame. Her blonde hair was pulled into a severe bun, strands slicked back to reveal sharp cheekbones and eyes cold as winter frost. The silver serpent pendant at her throat caught the light, a gleaming promise of the ruthlessness to come. The crowd fell into a tense hush as the bell rang. Her voice echoed in my mind, steady and grim. One of us walks away, the other becomes fertilizer for whatever weeds grow in the prison graveyard. But we both died the day we walked through those doors. I nodded, though inside I felt hollow. She was right. We were both ghosts, shadows of the men and women we once were, living bodies animated by memory and fear. The fight was brutal and slow, a deadly dance of experience and desperation. Catherine moved with the precision of a seasoned officer, every strike measured, every block deliberate. I matched her, drawing on years of survival, every scar and lesson etched into my muscles. We circled each other, trading blows that echoed like thunder in the enclosed space. Sweat mixed with blood as the minutes dragged on, the crowd's cheers ebbing and flowing like a tide. Neither of us gave ground easily. When fatigue began to claim us both, I knew brute strength wouldn't win this. I had to outthink her, outwit the woman who had once commanded fleets and now ruled these prisoners with iron will. Feigning a limp, I slowed my movements, letting pain and exhaustion show in my eyes. Catherine's guard dropped just enough. Perhaps a moment's pity, or a fatal miscalculation. Seizing the chance, I drove my fist into her temple with a sickening crunch. She collapsed silently, eyes wide but unseeing. The crowd erupted, a cacophony of cheers and shouts that felt more like a funeral dirge. Standing over her still form, bloodied and exhausted, I felt the crushing weight of it all, the victories, the losses, the years of slow decay. Winning didn't mean freedom. It didn't mean hope. It meant survival in the most twisted sense, a hollow victory in a war without end. That night, I lay on the cold metal shelf in my cell, the mingled scent of sweat and blood clinging to my skin. I traced the jagged scar across my knuckles, the souvenir from the match, and wondered if it mattered any more who I was beneath the surface. The following days bled into one another. Promises of better treatment and food rations were whispered by guards with smirks, knowing they were lies. The system had claimed another victory. The other prisoners looked at me differently now. Fear, respect, envy, and pity mingled in their eyes as they passed in the corridors. I was both shield and target, a symbol of what survival demanded. The seasons changed somewhere far above us, though down here time felt like a cruel joke. The air was thick with the smell of rust and rot, the ever-present hum of machinery marking the endless grind of days and nights. Sometimes, in the brief moments between sleep and waking, fragments of memory surfaced, sunlight filtering through lace curtains, the scent of rain on cobblestones, the warmth of a woman's hand in mine. But these moments were fleeting, swallowed quickly by the relentless present. And yet, something stirred beneath the surface. A whisper of something almost forgotten. Hope. But in Ravenhall, hope was a dangerous thing. One evening, as I sat alone in the dim light of the common area, a figure approached. She was slight, with dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, and eyes that held a spark of defiance. Her name was Emily, a newcomer with fire in her soul and a mind sharp as broken glass. She spoke quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. They think you're broken, but I see the fire still burning. You're not like the rest. I studied her, wary but intrigued. In a place designed to crush spirits, finding a flicker of rebellion was rare and dangerous. She leaned in closer. There's talk, plans. Something to shake this place to its core. Her words hung in the air, heavy with promise and peril. I knew then that the fight was far from over, and that the next battle wouldn't just be for survival. It would be for something more. But to understand that, I'd have to confront the ghosts of my past, and the shadows waiting in the depths of Ravenhall. The question was I still the man to face them? Or just another broken soul waiting to be consumed? Emily's words echoed in the hollow corridors long after she left. The flicker of rebellion she spoke of wasn't just a passing whisper. It was a pulse beneath the prison's cold concrete skin, a heartbeat of resistance waiting to ignite. I found myself drawn to her fire, even as the years of brokenness warned me to stay in the shadows. Days later, in the cramped mess hall where the stench of burnt gruel clung to the air, I met her again. She wore a simple gray shirt tucked into worn trousers, her boots scuffed from endless marching. Around her neck hung a delicate chain with a tiny silver key, a relic from a life outside these walls, or perhaps a symbol of the freedom she sought. Her dark eyes locked onto mine with unwavering intensity. "You've survived longer than anyone I know," she said, voice low. "You know the rules. You know how they break us. But maybe we can fight back." I raised an eyebrow, the ghost of a smirk tugging at my lips despite the weight in my chest. "Fight back? In Ravenhall? What are you? A magician?" She smiled, a brief flash of warmth that seemed almost out of place in this place of despair. "No magic. Just people who refuse to be broken." That night, beneath the flickering glow of a dying light bulb in the common area, Emily laid out the plan. It was audacious, a coordinated uprising during the next work shift, designed to seize control of the forgeworks and disable the alarm systems. The goal wasn't just escape. It was to send a message that even here, in the darkest depths, we could reclaim some measure of power. I listened, the years of caution battling with a spark of something I thought had died long ago, hope. But hope was a dangerous thing here. The days leading up to the uprising were tense. Every step was measured, every glance a secret signal. I moved like a shadow, blending with the broken and the beaten, guarding the fragile ember that might yet become a blaze. The morning of the revolt arrived with the usual cold silence. We gathered in small clusters, hands trembling, eyes burning with a mix of fear and determination. The clang of metal and the hiss of steam filled the forgeworks as we prepared to strike. Then chaos. The plan faltered almost immediately. Guards swarmed like wasps, their augmented bodies moving with terrifying speed and precision. The alarms wailed, drowning out our shouts and cries. Smoke and dust filled the air, choking and blinding. I fought with the cold efficiency of a man who'd long ago shed hesitation. Fists and makeshift weapons found targets, but the tide was against us. And then betrayal. From the shadows, a figure stepped forward, Peter. His gaunt face was twisted with desperation and fear, eyes darting as he gestured to the guards. The uprising crumbled like ash in the wind. Captured, beaten, and broken, I was dragged back to a cell smaller and darker than before. Solitary confinement had become my new reality. Days bled into weeks. The silence was a suffocating blanket, pressing in from all sides. The only sounds were the drip of water somewhere distant and the hollow echo of my own breathing. Madness crept in on silent feet. I talked to the walls, recited fragments of poetry, sang songs whose words had long since faded. Shadows danced just beyond my vision. Faces appeared and vanished like phantoms. In the depths of that darkness, I confronted the man I'd become. Not the teacher from Nottingham, not the man who once dreamed of gardens and sunlight, but a ghost forged in iron and pain. When they finally returned me to the general population, the prison had changed again. The reforms of the brief uprising were crushed, replaced by harsher rules, increased brutality, and a new warden, Colonel Marcus Thorne, a man whose cold gaze could freeze blood. Under Thorne, the gladiatorial tournaments expanded, the work shifts grew longer, and the food grew worse. Hope was stamped out with ruthless efficiency. Yet, even as the prison tightened its grip, the spark Emily had lit refused to die. In quiet corners, whispers of resistance persisted. Plans were whispered, alliances formed and broken in the shadows, and I found myself drawn once more into the dangerous dance of rebellion. But the deeper I delved, the clearer it became that survival here demanded sacrifice. And sometimes survival demanded losing yourself entirely. As the shadows lengthened and the cold seeped deeper into my bones, I knew one thing for certain. The fight was far from over, and the next move would change everything. The cold stone cell felt smaller than ever. The thin mattress beneath me no cushion but a reminder of everything I'd lost. Days in isolation bled into each other. No sunlight, no voices, just the distant hum of machinery and my own ragged breathing. I counted the seconds, then the minutes, then the hours, though I knew time was a meaningless torment here. When I was finally dragged back into the general population, the harsh fluorescent lights of Ravenhall felt like a slap. The air was thick with dust and despair, punctuated by the shouts of guards and the low murmurs of prisoners settling into their routines of survival. Colonel Marcus Thorne ruled this place with an iron fist wrapped in military precision. His eyes, cold and unyielding, scanned us like livestock, weighing and measuring every twitch and sigh. Under his command, the gladiatorial tournaments became a grotesque spectacle. More brutal, more frequent, and with higher stakes. The work shifts lengthened until exhaustion was a constant companion, and the food was little more than tasteless paste, designed to keep bodies alive, but spirits broken. Thorne made it clear from his first address. There would be no more illusions of rehabilitation. Your purpose here, he said, voice echoing off the concrete walls, is not to become better people, but to serve the system until your usefulness expires. The message was as clear as the scars that lined my knuckles. Despite the tightening grip, the embers of rebellion Emily had sparked still smoldered. Quiet conversations in shadowed corners, coded messages slipped through the cracks, and fleeting alliances forged in desperation. The prison might crush bodies, but it couldn't entirely extinguish the human spirit. I was pulled into these murmurings, approached by factions seeking fighters, strategists, or spies. My reputation as a tournament survivor made me valuable. My years inside gave me insight others lacked. But I declined all invitations. Experience had taught me that overt resistance invited swift, brutal retaliation. And in Ravenhall, survival often meant staying invisible. Neither hero nor villain, but a ghost drifting through the machinery of despair. Yet, the walls have ears, and secrets don't stay buried for long. 3 months into Thorne's reign, the prison erupted in a crackdown. A smuggling ring had been uncovered, moving contraband like whispered promises between cell blocks. The investigation was ruthless, interrogations designed to break even the most hardened, searches that tore through cells like storms, and punishments meted out with cold precision. Prisoners turned on each other, lured by promises or threatened by horrors worse than death. Trust became a currency more valuable than food or favors, yet rarer than hope. I was questioned repeatedly about contacts, knowledge of resistance, willingness to cooperate. The lead interrogator was a man who knew the psychology of long-term prisoners, wielding pressure like a scalpel. "You're a survivor," he said one day, voice low and calculating. 10 years in this place, adapted, avoided risks. Cooperation fits that pattern. The choice was clear: collaborate and live under a microscope, or resist and face swift oblivion. I chose neither. I withdrew completely. No me etchings, no vice-versa, no alliances. I worked when ordered, fought when forced, and otherwise existed like a machine powered down between tasks. This invisibility became my shield and my prison. Other inmates began to avoid me, unsure if I was informer or madman. I became a ghost in Ravenhall, present, but untouchable. The resistance network was shattered, members executed or transferred to worse facilities. The administration tightened control, installing surveillance that made secret meetings impossible. Then Colonel Thorne summoned me to his office. His cold eyes studied me like a puzzle missing pieces. 43 prisoners involved, he said, reading from a file. Risked everything for illusions. Freedom, dignity, whatever you call it. He paused, expecting an explanation. I had none. Intelligence suggests you're either the smartest prisoner here or the most broken, he continued. Either way, you're a valuable case study. I was ordered transferred to the research wing, the darkest depths of Ravenhall, where prisoners became subjects in experiments designed to perfect control. My new cell was larger, with better lighting and a small window overlooking the cavernous machinery below. But the improvements were cold calculations, not kindness. The researchers began immediately, testing reaction times, cognitive function, stress thresholds. They mapped the transformation 10 years had wrought on my mind and body. Physical exams revealed scars from chemical exposure, bone thinning from malnutrition, and nerves on edge like a soldier's. Psychological tests probed empathy, morality, and violence. They were fascinated by my ability to kill without emotion. Survival ethics replaced social conscience. I was their masterpiece, a template for the future of incarceration. Dr. Helena Cross, the lead researcher, was a thin woman with prematurely gray hair and eyes sharp as scalpels. Punishment is inefficient, she explained during one interview. Our goal is internalized control, subjects who police themselves. She called me stable adaptation, a success of conditioning. When I asked what happened when my usefulness ended, she smiled thinly. Some moved to productive work, others to advanced modification. Translation: servitor conversion, surgical erasure of self for mechanical obedience. The research continued: chemical treatments, surgeries, behavioral therapies, fine-tuning the machine I'd become. I complied, not out of hope, but exhaustion. The final interview left no illusions. You are a success story, Dr. Cross said. A loyal subject optimized for institutional needs. I was the perfect prisoner. That night, lying on the cold metal shelf, I tried to recall the man I'd been. The face that surfaced was generic, unremarkable, perhaps a ghost or a fabrication. The man who'd entered Ravenhall 10 years ago was gone, replaced by this hollow shell. And yet, buried deep beneath years of pain and conditioning, a question stirred. Was there still a trace of him left? Or had the system finally won? The research wing was a world apart from the rest of Ravenhall, though not in kindness or comfort, but in cold, clinical precision. My cell had a small window looking out onto the cavernous engines that powered the prison. Their mechanical heartbeat a grim reminder of the machine I had become part of. The air smelled faintly of oil and sterilizer, a sterile contrast to the stench of despair that permeated the general population. Every day began with tests. Reaction times, memory recall, emotional responses, all recorded with cold efficiency by faceless technicians. They poked and prodded, watched my every twitch, every hesitation, searching for cracks in the armor they were so eager to build around me. Dr. Helena Cross was a constant presence, her gaunt face framed by prematurely gray hair, eyes sharp and unyielding. She spoke of progress like a scientist discussing an experiment, never once acknowledging the man beneath the data points. Punishment is clumsy, she explained during one session, voice clipped. Our goal is internalized control, subjects who require no external coercion. I was to become that subject, a perfect prisoner, loyal and efficient. Chemical treatments followed, designed to tweak neurotransmitters and dull the edges of rebellion. Surgical procedures targeted brain regions tied to independent thought, replacing them with circuits of obedience. Behavioral therapies reinforced loyalty through rewards and punishments more subtle and insidious than the guard's shock prods. Resistance was futile. I complied, each step dragging me further from the man I once was. The researchers marveled at my transformation. Stable adaptation, they called it, a testament to their methods. Yet in the quiet moments, when the tests paused and the machines hummed softly, I grappled with the emptiness inside. Memories flickered, sunlight through a bedroom window, the scent of rain on an old leather jacket, laughter from a distant past. Were these echoes real, or just ghosts conjured by a mind fighting to remember? One evening, Dr. Cross posed a question that cut deeper than any scalpel. Do you believe the man who came here would recognize who you are now? I wanted to say no, to scream that I was a prisoner, a victim of a system designed to erase. But the truth was more complicated. The man who had spoken against corruption, who had dared to hope, was gone. In his place was something else, something shaped by years of cruelty and conditioning, yet still clinging faintly to a shard of self. The final phase of testing brought new procedures, experimental conditioning techniques meant to perfect the transformation. Chemical cocktails fine-tuned my brain chemistry. Surgeries etched obedience deeper into my neural pathways. Each procedure dimmed a part of me, but the core, the part that remembered, held on. The researchers couldn't understand this stubborn spark. To them, compliance was a binary state. To me, it was a battlefield. Months passed in a blur of tests and treatments, each day stripping away more of my autonomy. Then came the notification. A transfer to a work program on an agri-world named Demet's Garden. A place of ironic beauty, where the soil was poisoned and the air heavy with dust. Yet the name promised abundance. I was among others like me, modified, compliant, efficient. The transport ship was silent, the passengers lost in the shadows of their fractured minds. Demet's Garden was a stark landscape of artificial lakes and algae farms stretching beyond the horizon. The work was repetitive, maintaining filtration systems, harvesting protein-rich algae, processing nutrients. Our lives were regulated by implants dictating sleep, nutrition, and labor cycles with machine precision. We were cogs in a vast agricultural machine, our bodies and minds engineered for productivity. In brief moments between sleep and waking, fragments of dreams surfaced. Sunlight on wooden floors, the taste of home-cooked meals, laughter echoing in empty rooms. But these memories faded quickly, overwhelmed by the relentless demands of the work. I was becoming obsolete, a biological machine wearing out. My hair whitened. Tremors shook my hands. Vision blurred. A medical evaluation declared my productivity below threshold. Termination was scheduled. 3 days to complete final assignments. On the last day, I was escorted to a processing facility. Rows of obsolete workers waiting their turn, tagged and logged like defective parts. The technician was efficient, checking my ID and preparing the injection. "Any final statements?" she asked, voice bored. I told her I'd been dead for 11 years, 7 months, and 22 days. She noted it, then administered the injection. As the chemical cocktail flooded my veins, shutting down systems with ruthless precision, a strange calm settled over me. The endless vigilance, the calculation of survival, the crushing weight of compliance, all lifted. In those final moments, I glimpsed peace. Not in victory or freedom, but in completion. The system had succeeded. The man who spoke against corruption was gone, replaced by a perfect tool. My death was logged as routine maintenance, no more significant than replacing a broken filter. My body recycled into nutrients for the algae farms, the endless cycle. Prison was not punishment here. It was transformation and consumption. A factory breaking people until only function remained. No redemption, no justice, only efficiency. The system did not hate. It was indifferent, a machine grinding on. And I was part of its gears. But somewhere, deep in the fading light, a whisper lingered. A question unanswered. What if the man I was never truly died? What if, beneath the broken shell, something waited? Something that might rise again. But that is a story for another time. The sterile hum of the processing facility faded into silence as darkness claimed me. But the story didn't end there. Not really. Somewhere beneath the layers of conditioning, beneath the chemical fog and surgical scars, a fragment of something stubborn remained. Call it a flicker, a spark, or simply the echo of a man long forgotten. Years later, in a place far from Demet's garden's toxic algae farms, whispers began to swirl among the scattered remnants of those broken and lost. The Imperium's reach was vast, but even its iron grip held cracks where hope could seep through. I don't remember how I awoke, if awakening is the right word. There was no grand revelation, no sudden burst of clarity, just a slow, creeping awareness that the world wasn't quite as it should be, that somewhere inside, beneath the layers of machine and pain, something called out. I found myself on a distant agri-colony, a remote outpost where the sky was a dull, endless gray, and the wind carried the scent of chemicals and decay. The facility was a research station, cloaked in secrecy, where the Imperium experimented with new ways to break and rebuild. They called it Project Lazarus. It was here that I was pulled back from the edge, not restored but repurposed. My body, though battered and worn, was grafted with experimental implants designed to restore function while maintaining control. Synthetic muscles twitched beneath pale skin. Neural interfaces hummed quietly beneath my skull. I was a patchwork of flesh and machine, a living testament to what the Imperium could create. But the mind was a battlefield. Fragments of memory surfaced. Faces, places, names I thought lost. A garden in Nottingham, a woman's laughter, the feel of rain on a summer's day. Each recollection was a knife twisting in the void. The scientists monitored me closely, running tests to measure how much of the old self remained. They were fascinated by the contradictions, a prisoner conditioned for obedience yet haunted by ghosts of rebellion. One researcher, a woman named Dr. Evelyn Shaw, took a particular interest. She was sharp-eyed and guarded, with a voice that could be both soothing and chilling. "You are a paradox," she said during one session. "A man broken and remade, yet still fighting to reclaim what was lost." I said nothing. The days bled into nights as I navigated this new existence, caught between the remnants of humanity and the cold logic of machinery. I learned to control the synthetic muscles, to interpret the neural feedback, to mask the flickers of resistance that still sparked beneath the surface. But the Imperium's grip was tightening. Project Lazarus was no act of mercy. It was another step in a grand design to create perfect servants, obedient and unthinking. Yet somewhere deep within, a plan took shape, not just to survive, but to fight back, to reclaim what had been stolen. I began to seek out others, those like me, survivors of the system's cruel experiments, fragments of broken souls pieced together with steel and code. Together, we forged a fragile alliance, a network of ghosts bound by shared pain and whispered hope. We moved in shadows, communicating through encrypted channels and clandestine meetings beneath the colony's sterile halls. Our goal was simple yet perilous, to escape the Imperium's grasp and find a way to undo the damage, if such a thing was even possible. The risks were immense. Discovery meant death or worse, but the alternative was oblivion. One night, as the colony's artificial lights flickered against the endless gray sky, I stood before a cracked window, watching the barren landscape stretch into the horizon. The wind carried a faint scent: earth, rain, freedom. I clenched my fists, feeling the hum of synthetic muscles beneath my skin. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. And somewhere, beyond the stars and shadows, a reckoning awaited. But the path forward was shrouded in mystery, and the cost would be greater than any of us imagined. The air in the research colony was always thick with the sterile chill of controlled environments, a constant reminder that nature here was a distant memory. Outside the reinforced glass, the bleak plains stretched endlessly, a barren expanse of cracked soil and withered brush beneath a sky perpetually overcast. It was the kind of place where hope withered just as surely as the land. Inside, the corridors hummed with the quiet efficiency of machines and whispered conversations, secrets traded in hushed tones by those who dared to resist. I had come to know the faces of the others in our fragile network, scarred, haunted, yet alive with a flicker of something the Imperium could never fully extinguish. There was Marcus, a former mechanic whose hands still trembled from years of chemical exposure, but who could dismantle a security lock with surgical precision. Lila, whose eyes held the fierce defiance of a woman who had lost everything but refused to be broken. And Jace, a quiet man whose silence spoke volumes, carrying the weight of past betrayals. Our meetings were brief and cautious, held in the shadows of maintenance tunnels or behind false panels where sensors dared not look. Every word was weighted, every glance a silent warning. Plans took shape amid whispered urgency, a daring attempt to seize control of the colony's communication arrays, to send a signal beyond the Imperium's reach. A call for aid, a beacon for freedom. But the walls had ears. The colony's overseers were no fools. They tightened security, increased patrols, and introduced new surveillance measures designed to snuff out dissent before it could spark. One evening, as I moved through the labyrinthine corridors, a sudden clang echoed behind me. A trap sprung. I spun, heart pounding, to face a squad of guards, their augmented limbs gleaming under harsh lights, weapons trained and ready. There was no time for hesitation. Instinct took over. I struck with the precision of a man who had survived 1,000 battles. Fists connecting with augmented joints, movements honed by years of brutal training and raw desperation. The fight was swift and brutal. I was outnumbered but fueled by something beyond survival, a desperate need to protect the fragile hope we had kindled. When the last guard fell, I was breathing hard, blood slick on knuckles and lips. But victory was hollow. The alarm blared, a harsh, unforgiving scream that shattered the silence and summoned reinforcements. I fled into the tunnels, the pounding footsteps of pursuers close behind. Darkness swallowed me as I slipped through narrow passages, the hum of machinery a distant echo. When I emerged into a forgotten sublevel, I found Marcus and Lila waiting, their faces pale but resolute. "We lost Jace," Lila whispered, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Captured during the sweep." The loss weighed heavily, a brutal reminder of the stakes we faced. But surrender was not an option. We regrouped, tending wounds and planning our next move. The communication arrays remained our beacon, a chance to reach beyond the cold walls and shadows. Days later, under the cover of a simulated storm, we struck again. Marcus worked feverishly, bypassing firewalls and rerouting signals as alarms blared in the distance. Finally, a crackling transmission broke through the static, a message of defiance and plea for aid, sent into the void. But the Imperium was watching. Within hours, reinforcements descended. Soldiers clad in black armor, faces obscured, their presence a living testament to the relentless machinery of control. We fought with everything we had, but the odds were insurmountable. One by one, we fell or were captured. As I was dragged away, battered and bloodied, I caught a glimpse of the sky beyond the reinforced windows, a sliver of pale light breaking through the gray. Promise. A warning. The fight was not over. And somewhere, deep within the shadows of the Imperium, a reckoning was stirring. But the cost of resistance was written in blood. And the next chapter would demand sacrifices beyond imagining. The cold clang of the cell door echoed behind me as they threw me into the dim, cramped holding bay, a cage carved from rusted steel and shadow. My body ached from the fight. Bruises bloomed beneath skin already marred by years of torment. The taste of blood and dust hung heavy in my mouth, a bitter reminder of the cost we'd paid. Around me, other prisoners, broken, silent, watched with hollow eyes. Some nodded in grim acknowledgement. Others looked away, too weary to even hope. Isolation was a weapon here, designed to crush the spirit long before it could break the body. Days blurred into nights. The guards' footsteps became a metronome to my slow unraveling, their casual cruelty a constant presence. Interrogations came and went. Sharp questions laced with threats, promises, and lies. They wanted names, plans, the names of those still resisting. I gave them nothing, but silence was not enough. One night, the cell's cold walls seemed to close in tighter, shadows twisting into shapes. Faces from the past, ghosts of the man I once was. I whispered fragments of forgotten poems under my breath, a feeble grasp at sanity. Then came the arrival. A new prisoner, escorted with the heavy chains of suspicion and fear. She was young, with eyes like storm clouds and hair tangled as though she'd been dragged through every nightmare imaginable. Her name was Claire. Word spread quickly. She was from a distant world, a place rumored to be beyond the Imperium's reach. A survivor of a secret rebellion, captured and brought here as a warning. But Claire carried something different. An unyielding fire and a message that chilled the air. "They think they can break us," she said quietly to those willing to listen. "But the cracks are growing. The Imperium's grip is slipping." Her words ignited something deep inside me. A reminder that even in the darkest prisons, hope could take root. Claire spoke of distant allies, hidden cells and resistance fighters scattered across the stars, waiting for a spark to ignite rebellion. Together, we whispered plans of escape and revolution, weaving threads of defiance in the fabric of despair. But the guards were always watching. One night, as shadows lengthened and silence deepened, the alarms blared, a shrill scream that shattered the fragile calm. Chaos erupted. Prisoners surged, fists and makeshift weapons clashing with guards in brutal, desperate combat. I fought beside Claire, our movements synchronized by years of pain and survival. The battle was fierce and fleeting. Amid the turmoil, I glimpsed the truth. The Imperium's power was vast, but not unassailable. Yet freedom demanded sacrifice. As the dust settled, bodies lay broken and still. Claire was gone. Taken amidst the chaos, her fate unknown. I was left with a burning question and a heavy heart. How much must one lose before the fight for freedom becomes the fight for survival? The answer was coming, and with it, a reckoning that would change everything. The shadows whispered of a final stand, and I knew I had to be ready. The final days in that hellish cage blurred into a relentless march toward something inevitable. My muscles ached from bruises that never healed, my mind a storm of memories and half-forgotten dreams. The air was thick with despair, yet beneath it all, a stubborn ember of defiance smoldered. Claire's disappearance left a scar deeper than any wound. Her fire had rekindled hope, only to be snuffed out before it could spread. But her words lingered, whispers of rebellion beyond these walls, of allies waiting in the stars, of a reckoning to come. I clung to that whisper like a lifeline. Then came the summons. The guards arrived with cold efficiency, their faces obscured behind visors that reflected nothing but steel resolve. They shackled me, led me through winding corridors, past rows of silent faces, ghosts of prisoners who had vanished into the system's maw. We emerged into a vast chamber, stark and sterile. At its center stood a platform illuminated by harsh white light. Around it, a ring of guards and officials watched with detached interest. The warden's voice cut through the silence. "Your sentence is complete, but your journey is not over." I understood. This was no freedom. It was a final test, a choice between oblivion and servitude. They offered me the last mercy of the Imperium, conversion into a servitor, a mind stripped bare, obedience encoded, humanity erased. I looked into the cold eyes of my captors and saw the reflection of the man I had been. A man lost to time, to pain, to a system that consumed all. But beneath the layers of conditioning and despair, something stirred. A final flicker of resistance. I refused. The chamber erupted into chaos. Guards lunged, weapons raised. I fought with every ounce of strength left, not for survival, but for the memory of who I once was, and who I still might be. The battle was swift, brutal, and ultimately futile. Darkness claimed me as the world faded to black. But even in that void, a truth remained. The Imperium could break bodies, extinguish lights, and erase names. But it could never fully conquer the human spirit. Because somewhere, in the depths of shadow and silence, hope endures. And as long as hope lives, so does the fight. The story does not end here. It only begins anew. For in the heart of darkness, the faintest light can ignite a revolution.